Most people move quickly through this part of the story, but if you slow down and watch the details carefully, something unusual begins to unfold. Saul is the king of Israel, and kings are accustomed to seeing their commands produce immediate results. When a ruler sends soldiers to carry out an order, the outcome normally follows the authority behind the command. Yet what begins to happen in this moment reveals that events are moving in a direction the king cannot control. By this point in the story, the tension between Saul and David has already been building quietly for some time. David's victory over Goliath made him known throughout the nation, and the songs sung in the streets began to change the way people spoke about him. What began as celebration slowly turned into comparison, and comparison quietly stirred something dangerous inside the king's heart. Saul had already tried several ways to manage the situation, but none of them produced the outcome he wanted. At first, the king attempted to control the situation indirectly. David received promotions and responsibilities that appeared honorable on the surface, yet those opportunities often carried hidden danger beneath them. The assignments placed David in positions where success could easily become risk, and even the rewards Saul offered sometimes contained traps that could quietly remove David from the picture while protecting the king's reputation. Yet every attempt produced the same frustrating outcome, because David continued to survive and succeed while Saul's frustration continued to grow. Eventually, the tension reached the point where Saul stopped disguising his intentions. The decision was made that David must be captured, and soldiers were sent to carry out that command. From the king's perspective, the matter should have ended there, because authority had spoken and the system of the kingdom was expected to follow through. The soldiers knew where David had gone, and word had reached the palace that David had found refuge in Ramah near the prophet Samuel. This detail becomes far more important than it might appear at first. Ramah was not simply another village where David could hide, because it was closely connected with Samuel and the community of prophets who gathered around him. These prophets were men devoted to prayer, prophecy, and listening for what they believed God was revealing to the nation. The atmosphere surrounding that gathering was very different from the halls of the palace or the training grounds of the army. When soldiers move through the kingdom carrying the authority of the king, most people step aside and allow them to complete their mission. Commands from the throne normally travel through the land without resistance. The men Saul sent to Ramah likely expected the same response when they arrived, because they were trained soldiers following a direct order from the king of Israel. Yet the moment they stepped into the gathering of prophets, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of immediately seizing David and completing their assignment, the soldiers encountered an atmosphere they did not understand. The gathering they walked into was filled with prayer, prophecy, and a spiritual intensity that was completely different from the environment they had come from. Rather than enforcing the authority they carried with them, the environment began to influence their behavior. The men who arrived ready to capture David suddenly found themselves participating in the very gathering they had come to interrupt. Instead of arresting David, they began speaking among the prophets themselves as though they had become part of the moment unfolding around them. Whatever was happening in that place proved stronger than the authority they carried from the king. When the report of this reached the palace, Saul must have struggled to believe what he was hearing. Soldiers do not simply abandon their orders, and commands from the throne do not normally dissolve because of a gathering of prophets. From the king's perspective, the explanation seemed obvious, because something must have gone wrong with the men he sent. Perhaps the soldiers hesitated when they arrived. Perhaps they became confused by the gathering they encountered. Or perhaps they simply failed to complete the assignment. Whatever the explanation might have been, Saul believed the problem could be solved by sending another group of men. A second group of soldiers traveled toward Ramah carrying the same authority and the same instructions. The king expected the mission to succeed this time, because surely the first group had simply failed to do their job. Yet when the second group arrived, the same strange pattern began to unfold once again. Instead of capturing David, the second group also became part of the prophetic gathering. The men who arrived prepared to enforce the king's commands suddenly found themselves drawn into the same atmosphere that had changed the first group. Instead of returning with David, they too began speaking among the prophets. Now the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Two separate groups of trained soldiers had arrived in Ramah carrying the authority of the king, and both groups failed to complete the same assignment. The environment itself appeared to be reshaping the outcome the moment those men stepped into it. This moment reveals one of the deeper tensions inside the story. Saul believed authority could control the situation, yet Ramah was showing that something stronger than royal command was present there. The gathering of prophets created an atmosphere where the normal rules of authority no longer produced the expected results. Each report reaching the palace must have deepened Saul's frustration. Authority is supposed to produce predictable outcomes, and orders are expected to move through the system of a kingdom with clear results. Yet every attempt to enforce Saul's command was dissolving the moment it reached Ramah. The king who believed he controlled the outcome must now decide what to do when his authority repeatedly fails. At this point, the situation has become more than a simple pursuit, because the king's authority has already been tested twice and each attempt has ended the same way. Soldiers arrived expecting obedience, yet the moment they stepped into the gathering at Ramah their purpose seemed to dissolve. Instead of enforcing the command they carried, the soldiers became part of the prophetic atmosphere surrounding Samuel and the other prophets. The men who came prepared to seize David suddenly found themselves standing among voices speaking words of prophecy. Imagine how unsettling this must have sounded inside the palace where authority normally produced predictable results. Saul was accustomed to seeing his commands move through the kingdom without resistance. When soldiers were sent, people obeyed and situations changed. Yet the reports coming back from Ramah described something entirely different, because the authority of the throne had reached the gathering of prophets and simply stopped working. This is the tension quietly building in the background of the story. Each attempt to capture David is not only failing, it is failing in the same place and in the same way. Ramah has become the point where the king's authority encounters something it cannot control. The soldiers expected to bring David back in chains, yet they returned describing a gathering where the atmosphere itself seemed to change the behavior of everyone who entered it. The question now is no longer whether the soldiers can capture David. The question is what will happen when the king himself steps into the same gathering that stopped every soldier he sent. And that decision leads to one of the most surprising moments in the entire story. If the soldiers cannot complete the assignment, there is only one option left in the king's mind. Saul will go to Ramah himself and take control of the situation personally. What he does not realize is that the same atmosphere waiting for the soldiers is still present in that place. Samuel is still among the prophets, and the gathering that interrupted every attempt before him has not changed. When the king finally steps into that same environment, the story will reveal just how little control Saul truly has over what is about to happen next.